Shalom. Hello to all. I'm very excited to be here. There are very few opportunities in Israel that I feel very comfortable to stand up to say, hi, my name is Sivan Mas, I'm a rabbi, I'm an atheist, secular, humanist rabbi. Many times I say the sentence without using the word atheist because when I do, people either turn around and leave the room or get ready to fight. And we get to atheism much later on in the discussion. But it's certainly part of my identity. It's not something that I avoid. It's something that I learned I am as I studied various things in life. So, my name is Rabbi Sivan Mas, and I am an atheist, secular, humanist rabbi here in Israel. And about 16 years ago, I started Tmura Yahadut Israelit, Tmura Israeli Judaism, and the idea was to create a platform that educates and supports leaders who become secular humanist rabbis in Israel. And the idea was that for a very long time, many secular people in Israel were about what we don't want. We don't want religious people to tell us what to do. It's not that we're against religion, but we are sovereign people, and we want to make our own choices. But the question is, so what do you do? So for example, for me, it's important that my children will celebrate becoming adults, or really celebrating this time of life of changing, becoming an adult, starting to become an adult. In Jewish, we call it bar and bat mitzvah. The question is, what do you do in a secular humanist bar and bat mitzvah? That's what Tmura is about. Tmura is about finding what kind of positive content we can have. So if for me, being secular means being sovereign, in other words, there's no other sovereign that I have to abide by her or his rules, I'm sovereign to do what? In other words, what is my compass? And that's where humanism comes into play. In other words, there's a set of values, a set of beliefs, which become the infrastructure or this compass that I use. So that's why I'm a secular humanist. But I'm also Jewish. What does Judaism mean to me? Judaism means to me culture. Culture, family, roots. But culture is vast, like any other culture, any other, maybe you can say ethnic culture. It's always vast. There's always lots of very good texts and very not so great texts. Some are exceptional works of art and some are not. In other words, we all choose. It doesn't matter if we are religious or we are secular, we all choose. We all choose what to do. So I was brought up in a home where I was brought up in a secular home. I was brought up here in Israel, in Haifa, and in our home, it was obvious that what you need to do in Israel is that if you want to change something, you have to get up and do it. And if you need to build an institution to do that, you do that. And that's because that's what my parents did. My father, in the early 50s, was the repertory director of the Habima Theater here in Israel. Many, many, many years later, we found out that he was also Mossad, but we didn't know that at that point, or I didn't know that. And he was traveling the world, and he started to understand that the similarities and the needs between having a community center and having a synagogue. And saying, okay, I'm a secular person, and Israel at the time saw itself as a secular society. And he said, okay, so how do we get these people to congregate in a secular environment. And that's how he wrote an article in the newspaper at the time. And the mayor of Haifa, his name was Abachushi, read the article. And he read the article, and the article said, you know, we have to create community centers in Israel. And the mayor of Haifa said to him, you know, the Rothschild family just gave me a house on the Carmel mountain. And if you want to, come and live in Haifa and build the community center. So he did. And after a few years, realizing that the Arabs of Haifa do not come to the community center, mostly because of geographical reasons, he said that can't be. We have to cater to all the societies that live in Israel. So he started Beit HaGefen, which is the Arab Jewish community center in Israel. And that's the type of home that I grew up in. In other words, it was always, okay, what is the challenge? Now let's figure out the solution. And if it doesn't exist, let's build it. And that's how I came to start Tmura all these years ago. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But I'd like you to meet my father, who passed away, therefore we will use YouTube, no other way. And this is a short film talking about him as an atheist, what he thinks about death. So we will hear him. I will interject some sentences in English and then try to say a few words in the end in English also to connect, but it is in Hebrew. So, Emil, this is your cue. Okay, so as you do that, I'll keep talking. I'll give you an example, and I'll stop once the video starts. I'll give you an example of a manifestation of a secular way of life or a secular culture. Every year comes the spring, and in the spring, it's here. And in the spring, as you know, there is the Passover holiday or Pesach. Now, the concept of this holiday is a concept which is universal. It's about the right to be free, and it's about freedom. And the question is, what do you do when you sit together as a family and you think about what to do with this holiday? Now, this is really tough to talk while this is going on, but I'll try anyway.
בעולמם הרוחני של אנשים חופשיים מדת. המוות הוא בעצם מילה בשביל השם של המעבר מהיות לאי-היות.
Death is about a transition between being and non-being.
של אותו אדם שמת. אפיקורס אמר, במקום שאני נמצא אין מוות.
Epicurus said, where I am, there's no death.
מן החיים הנצחיים המתחילים במוות לפי אמונות דתיות.
Helping to alleviate the anxiety from death.
כיוון שהמוות הוא מעבר מהיות לאי-היות, הוא ממילא לא אל חיים חדשים שיש בהם עינויים וגיהינום, אלא אל אי-היות.
It's not about a new life in hell or heaven.
למוות נלווית הישארות הנפש. הישארות הנפש באותו מובן שהרמב"ם הבין אותה במורה נבוכים, כאשר דיבר על התמזגות תבונת האדם עם תבונת העולם, שבשבילו היה האלוהים.
Sustainability of the soul is about the sustainability of reason.
בנפשם של אוהביי. הישארות נפשי
in the soul
בנפשם של
of
אהוביי.
the people who love me.
הישארות הנפש היא שהם יכולים להמשיך את השיח גם אחרי שהדיבור נגמר.
They can continue the dialogue
קשור אומנם בעצב
when the
הפרידה.
words cease to exist.
פרידה מידידים, פרידה מאוהבים, פרידה מעצמי. אני כבר לא אכיר את עצמי ולא אדע את עצמי ולא אדע שאני חי או שאני הווה אחרי מותי.
I will not know myself. I will
כי
not know
האדם
my
הוא
living self.
אולי היצור היחידי בעולם שיכול להיות לא רק להיות, אלא גם לדעת שהוא הווה, שהוא ישנו. האדם הוא היצור היחידי שיכול להבין את המוות ואת מה שיקרה אחרי המוות. עצב הפרידה מאוהבים ומידידים ומעצמי מתמזג גם בתקווה. בתקווה כי ידידים ואוהבים יזכרו את המת, יזכרו את אנושיותו, את אישיותו, יזכרו ואולי יכירו את יצירותיו, כיוון שהאדם הוא היחידי אשר יכול ביצירות רוחניות לחולל תמורות. תמורות בחיים שלו, של היוצר, ובחיים של אלה הנהנים מיצירותיו, לא רק בחייו, אלא גם אחרי מותו. היצירות אשר בהם אנחנו מביעים את חיינו, היצירות הרוחניות שבהם אנחנו מביעים את מחשבותינו ואת הגותנו, הן חלק מהירושה שאנחנו מורישים לאלה שהמשיכו להיות כשאנחנו כבר לא נהיה. האדם הוא היחידי שיכול לסטות מן המסורת. מותר האדם הוא היכולת לוותר על המסורת. כל החיות האחרות בעולם כנועות, משועבדות למסורת אשר הטבע קבע עליהן, כפה עליהן. כל החיות חייבות להתנהג כהוריהן והוריהן.
From their own legacy and history.
היכול לא רק לחיות בסביבה טבעית, אלא לשנות את הסביבה הטבעית. היכול לא רק לחיות בסביבה חברתית, אלא לשנות את הסביבה.
Natural environment.
וזה הוא יכול לעשות גם בחייו וגם אחרי מותו.
During your life and after your
ומכאן
life.
התקווה המתלווה לעצב הפרידה.
This is why there's hope.
ומכאן התקווה
even when we have to
הנובעת
say
ממותו
goodbye.
האדם. ומכאן גם הכוח של האהבה שהוא חזק מן המוות.
The force of love is
הכוח
stronger
של
than
האהבה המתמזגת עם זיכרון החיים ועם זיכרון המתים.
death. Fuses with memory
הכוח של
of
האהבה
the living and the dead.
הגורם לתקווה גם כאשר אנחנו נפגשים במוות,
Creates hope
גם כאשר אנחנו חווים אותו.
even when we meet death, even when we experience it. נשמח לאור. Let there be light. Thank you. I remember when the reason you met my father is because I was invited to talk about Professor Malkin, who was here in 2012, talking about what it means for him to be an atheist and a secular believer, or as we call it, the belief of the non-believers. We use this terminology in Hebrew. It is easier because in Hebrew there is no difference between faith and belief. In Hebrew it's one word. In English it's probably easier because there are two words. But Professor Malkin saw himself as a believer. And for us in Israel, it's a political matter. And what I mean is that in the public sphere, when you want to have different things, different festivals or various events, you seem to find yourself talking to other people who say to you, look, we need to have the women in one place and the men in the other place because it's according to our belief that they should be separated. And then what secular people usually do and say, okay, if that's what you believe, then, we won't go against your belief. But if a secular person says, listen, I believe in egalitarian equality, and for me, men and women should, feel free to be wherever they want to be, then the conversation is different. The conversation is about various people with various beliefs, and the solution has to create a new kind of compromise or a new kind of synergy. It cannot be about a certain group of people who are the believers and we need to abide by whatever needs they have. And then there's the non-believers, which, okay, fine, you know, that's not the case. So one of the things that we need to figure out is how do we articulate our beliefs? What is it that secular, humanist, atheists, agnostics, the list goes on and on, what do they actually believe? So some of it is pretty simple. People already thought about it. If you read, I don't know, the Declaration of Independence or let's say the Jefferson Declaration, and you see that, you know, one of the things that he believed in was that every person has the right to pursue happiness. For example, would you put that on your list of beliefs? I would, because I believe in life before death. And therefore, I think that people should be able to be happy. So that becomes part of the set of beliefs. And that means that I need to enable men and women to be happy. Men and women to get the kind of education that they need, that they would have the kind of proficiency and tools, etc., to fulfill their potential. Okay, here comes another belief. So just think about it. Just like religious people, just like the Rambam put together his 13 beliefs, we should be doing the same thing. We should be clear about the things that we believe in. The sovereignty of human person, the ability, or I would say the right of a secular person to live by their beliefs. Not only what are their beliefs, but the right to live by their beliefs. So how do you do it? I'm going to give you just 2 examples of what actually do we do. Okay, so it sounds like a little bit in the air, maybe a little too philosophical. I want to tell you about what we do, okay? So one is a story that I started before about Passover. What do we do in Passover? One option is to take the traditional religious Haggadah, which is basically a script that tells you what you should do during the meal. And you do whatever it tells you. That's an option. That's not necessity. You are sovereign. You can decide if that's what you want. Think about it for a minute. There was this story in the Bible, let's say it's a good one, about people becoming free. And you want to keep telling the story. Why? Either because you think it's important or you think because you have to. Okay? So you look at the story, and what did the rabbis do in the 9th century? They said, okay, I'll tell you how to tell the story. I'm going to rewrite the script of what has to go on in the Seder. And you know what? I'm going to take the 2 major heroes of the story and throw them out. And that's what they did. They took Moses and Aaron and threw them out and said, it's a different story. The story that I'm telling you now is about the way God took the Israelites out of Israel. Now, if those rabbis could do it, what does a secular humanist rabbi do? Or what did my parents do? Or what did the kibbutz society do? They said, we have a story to tell. It's about human equality, it's about human freedom, etc., etc., and they rewrote the script. So there are secular humanist Haggadahs out there today that you could use, or you can rewrite your own. And the other story, which I will finish up with that, is a story about a bat mitzvah. Because, I'll tell the story. The story is, one day I am sitting in my office, and a man, a woman, and a small child, a father, a mother, and a child by the age of 11 come into the room and say, we want to have a bat mitzvah for our child. And I said, fine. So I asked the child, you know, what's your dream bat mitzvah? And she says, nothing. Her head, she looks down, she's very bashful, she just doesn't answer. Okay, so I asked the mother, and the mother says, well, I don't really know, I never had a bat mitzvah because I was Christian and now I'm Jewish and I didn't have a bat mitzvah growing up. I don't really know what I want her to have a bat mitzvah. So I asked the father, The mother is secular, the father is religious. And I asked the father, what do you want your daughter to have as a bat mitzvah? And he says, I don't know, because I grew up in an Orthodox home and we don't have a bat mitzvah. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, okay, so what do you want? We have a list of what you have aspiration, but you can't even tell me what you really want. And then I ask the father, so how do we start this? What is going to be the story? What is the legacy of your family? And he says to me, with the mother and the child sitting there, and he says to me, they don't have a legacy. My family, and then he starts to tell me the story of this family. And I said to him, what do you mean they don't have a legacy? You are one family. This is your child. If she wants to celebrate her heritage, let's figure out a way to do that. So to cut a very long story short, we find ourselves in the Israeli Museum because I think Judaism is culture, and one of the ways to teach culture is visit museums. So we visit the Israeli Museum and we look at the Chanukiot, the menorahs for Hanukkah on the wall. And for the first time ever, the girl is able to talk and to express herself. And she loves this Chanukiah from Yemen, and this Chanukiah from Vienna, and this Chanukiah from etc., etc., etc. Many of them have images, another myth that Jewish art doesn't have images. And we walk around and she says to me, I want to create a Chanukiah, my menorah, of heroines, of Jewish heroines. And I said to her, fine. So we start learning about different Jewish heroines through history. And then I say to her, let's go back to your family. Now that we have Esther and Ruth, etc., and she has these beautiful sculptures that she made, I said, let's go back to your family. She says, well, my father's mother is Jewish, but my mother's mother is not. And I said to her, is she any less heroine in the way that, we defined heroine? She says, no. And she starts telling me the story of her grandmother and the story of the other grandmother. And she goes home and she makes these beautiful sculptures of her grandmothers. And then she goes and she makes this beautiful sculpture of her mother. And now we have this whole candelabra standing in front of us. And I said to her, and we're still missing the shamash. We're still missing the candle that lights up all the other candles in your menorah. And she says, well, that's me. And, at that point I felt, wow, she's gone through such a beautiful process of empowerment, of looking at this as her culture, looking at all of these heroines as part of her family. This is the way that she celebrated her bat mitzvah. So I hope that you will find your own way to celebrate.